The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom has become Nintendo's fastest-selling video game of all time, and won a Guinness World Record for that reason, as it smashed Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, which had held the fastest-selling title previously. Tears of the Kingdom is now on track to outsell its prequel Breath of the Wild in less than a year, while Breath of the Wild has been out for over 6 years. It is rather insane to think about, as Breath of the Wild has already outsold every Zelda game prior to its release, doubling Ocarina of Time's 14 million sales to a whopping 30 million. With Tears of the Kingdom selling over 10 million copies just at its launch weekend, and now amounting to over 20 million at the time of this video, the reach of the Legend of Zelda series only increases with each new iteration. A deeply immersive game series that was introduced to us nearly 4 decades ago, in all its pixelated glory. Yet after all of these years, Link's adventures still managed to exceed the expectations of its fan base, drawing in players with original and innovative gameplay that can only be part of the Zelda series. While Nintendo completely changed the series' standard formula with Breath of the Wild, in comparison to how the series prior to it followed a blueprint more consistent with Ocarina of Time, with dungeons being the main exploratory gameplay loop, and story playing a significantly larger part to the overall experience and outcome of the game. With Breath of the Wild, on the other hand, the player had complete autonomy to play the game how they chose. Anything works, since after the main tutorial, Link was free to explore to his heart's desire. This new approach clearly increased accessibility to players unfamiliar with the series, bringing in a plethora of fans that the series did not originally have. This presumably alienated older fans who preferred the straightforward, more linear approach. And Nintendo has clearly realized that this futuristic open-air formula that Breath of the Wild started is the next logical path to continue evolving the series moving forward, with Tears of the Kingdom not only expanding on it, but taking that concept into the next level. And Nintendo has reaped the benefit of these changes, as the sales have surely shown that this is the most profitable and popular approach. This new direction being the standard for the series was confirmed to us by the series producer Eiji Aonuma in an interview with GameInformer, stating that, quote, "With Ocarina of Time, I think it's correct to say that it did kind of create a format for a number of titles in the franchise that came after it. But in some ways, that was a little bit restricting for us. While we always aim to give the player freedoms of certain kinds, there were certain things that format didn't really afford in giving people freedom. Of course, the series continued to evolve after Ocarina of Time, but I think it's also fair to say now that we've arrived at Breath of the Wild and the new type of more open play and freedom that it affords, yeah, I think it's correct to say that it has created a new kind of format for the series to proceed from." End quote. So, for old school fans hoping for something more reminiscent of the Zelda of the past, I think you may be out of luck. Unless we get more remakes similar to Link's Awakening for the Nintendo Switch. But for fans like myself who embrace these changes, the future for the series is looking pretty exciting. And with how Tears of the Kingdom managed to blow Breath of the Wild's open-air concept out of the water, what could Nintendo do next to top Tears of the Kingdom? Well, one thing both games lacked was underwater exploration, which is oddly confounding to me, since every previous 3D Zelda game had some form of underwater exploration. With the exception of the Wind Waker, of course, a game that was completely covered by sea and was massive in scale, so it made sense why Nintendo didn't have that as a feature for it. But since Ocarina of Time, Link has always had enchanted items to help him delve underwater. The blue Zora tunic in Ocarina of Time allowed Link to breathe and function in its watery depths. Majora's Mask allowed Link to virtually transform into a Zora and swim like one thanks to the Zora Mask. Twilight Princess, which had the largest interpretation of Lake Hylia, yes, even than Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, also possessed Zora armor that was required to take on the Lakebed Temple that lied at the very bottom of the vast Hylia Lake. And Skyward Sword utilized a water dragon scale in its underwater search. Each of these games gave the player the option to explore underwater in some way or fashion. Yet, in the most unrestricted Zelda games of all time, that is mysteriously absent. Both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom have no method for the player to swim underwater, and I believe their lack of underwater exploration is similar to its absence in the Wind Waker. The games are just too immense, and adding underwater odysseys to its tremendous scale would have just been too much. And since we've experienced all that we can on Hyrule's surface, its open skies, and hidden depths, it's only logical for the next step to expand on Link's never-ending journey is to be able to trek underwater. Funnily enough, in their most recent update, Genshin Impact added underwater exploration. Genshin Impact, a game notorious for literally mimicking Breath of the Wild's entire concept, can now swim with the fish. Again, Genshin, which is visually identical to Breath of the Wild, with similar looking and acting enemies, and Breath of the Wild's signature feature of soaring uninhibited through the skies, has somehow beaten Nintendo to the punch. Like having Genshin Impact introduced as feature before Tears of the Kingdom, when most of their initial concepts plagiarized Breath of the Wild to begin with, truly perplexes me. But after witnessing how well this underwater mechanic works for a game considered to be a Breath of the Wild twist, it makes me only want it more in the next Zelda game. And it would only make sense for this to be Nintendo's next step for further expanding on the game's exploration. And it's not like they haven't done something like this before. Like, I'm sure some can agree with me on how much of a letdown Tears of the Kingdom's water temple was. Compared to any other 3D water temple within the series, it seriously lacked ingenuity. The water temples were notorious for being the most puzzling in the series. Sadly, in Tears of the Kingdom, the water temple was no more difficult than turning on a faucet. Get it? But speaking of the water temple, a temple heavily connected to the Zora people, the idea of exploring a land outside of Hyrule may be a possibility. As in Tears of the Kingdom, with the introduction of Sidon's fiancée Yona, she is described as a royal Zora from another domain, presumably hinting at the possibility of a land outside of Hyrule that has a Zora's domain of their very own. Though it's uncertain if that domain is actually located somewhere outside of Hyrule. We may have just not explored all of its land yet. While we did have a few Zelda games explore outside of Hyrule, they acted as parallel worlds rather than existing in the same world as Hyrule. So it's hard to imagine Nintendo finally moving on from Hyrule when it's such an integral part of the series. But I also doubt Nintendo would reuse the same Hyrule landscape for a third time in the upcoming installment. So whether we finally explore outside of Hyrule or revisit it again, maybe with a twist, adding an underwater realm would only expand on the unrestricting gameplay style Nintendo is aiming for with this series. Of course, this is all just speculation and wishful thinking. All we know is that the series will continue this trajectory that Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom has laid out moving forward. And I'm excited for whatever's in store, as Nintendo has proven that even with the many alternate changes they implemented in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, they still managed to supersede themselves from beginning to end. A series known for exploring a whimsical and fantastical land, with intricate puzzles, beautiful scenery, memorable music, and a unique vibe unlike no other gaming franchise. I don't see where they can go wrong. But outside of my safe speculations on where the series will be headed after this, I wanted to present to you a quick crackpot theory of what I hope the next Zelda game would be like. So please, bear with me, as I think you may like what I have cooking up. With how Breath of the Wild focused heavily on the Sheikah, a tribe represented by blue, and Tears of the Kingdom focused heavily on the Zonai, a tribe represented by green, what if the next Zelda game focuses heavily on a tribe represented by red? You may notice a pattern here, but with how the Sheikah represented the tech of Hyrule's past, being a tribe to protect the royal family of Hyrule, they always had a connection to the Triforce of Wisdom, as their literal creation was to protect its wielder, Princess Zelda. And this seems logical since they have always been represented with the color blue, which signifies their wisdom with the tech they create. The Zonai, on the other hand, were an ancient civilization that lay dormant in Hyrule's Faron region. This was the land of courage and gave mighty strength to the wielder of the Triforce of Courage, Link. And just like the Triforce of Courage, the Zonai have been represented by the color green, the color of Hyrule's first king, Rauru, who exhibited exceptional courage and was vital to sealing Ganondorf away for 10,000 years. So, my theory here is, what if the next Zelda game focuses on the Triforce of Power, ascribing it to the Demon King Ganondorf, symbolized by the color red? Or even perhaps the Yiga, Ganondorf's cult. Both Master and Servant are represented by red as their primary color. And with how we've seen malice and gloom corrupt and overtake parts of Hyrule, we can suspect that it holds plenty of significant power to the Sheikah and Zonai tribes, even down to surpassing their tech with this power and turning it against themselves, therefore concluding the Breath of the Wild saga into a trilogy that focuses on each part of the Triforce, and having the game in this 3-part series be the darkest story yet, as the first game focused on wisdom, the second focused on courage, and the third focusing on power. And even if for some reason we return to the same Hyrule, what if they were to completely change things up? How about having Hyrule turn into a dark world similar to A Link to the Past's Hyrule? Or perhaps akin to A Link Between Worlds' Lorule? This would make returning to a Hyrule a third time make better sense. A dark version of Hyrule, completely changing how the game is interpreted. Equivalent in theory to the 2 versions of A Link to the Past and A Link Between Worlds. And in this dark world, we solve red-type shrines, similar to how Breath of the Wild had blue shrines and Tears of the Kingdom had green ones. While these theories may seem mad to some, I can totally see Nintendo taking these steps, as it would allow them to further expand on additional ideas for an already great concept. Though as with all things, only time will tell. I just want to put my theory out there cause I'm nuts about Zelda. Or in case there are some similarities between my thoughts and speculations for when Nintendo finally does reveal the next Zelda game. But what are your theories and speculations for the next Zelda game? Please let me know in the comments below and let me know what you think of my theories, as I'd love to start a discussion in the comments. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching. Please leave a like on the video to show your support, and follow me on my social media linked below. Also make sure to join my Discord, the Knight Academy, to chat with me and to get other info regarding the channel and more. As always though, I've been ZM, and I'll see you all in the next one.